Kefentse Chike, Assistant Professor of Teaching of African American Studies at Wayne State. Also an alum, so I also went to undergrad here at Wayne State in African American Studies. It was Africana Studies at the time. And it's an honor and a privilege to be here. So, do people want to introduce themselves?
Hi, I'm Anwar Uhuru. I'm the Assistant Professor of African American Studies and Philosophy here, native Detroiter. My grandmother's a double moderator, so I have BSW and MSW here, so this is my home.
Hi, my name is Jamon Jordan, and I'm the official historian for the city of Detroit. I did not attend Wayne State University, but my son is a graduate from Wayne State University, and my daughter got her master's here. Okay. And she's now at Wayne State University Medical School.
Okay. Jamaica history.
I am Melba Boyd. I am retired. Yay.
Yes.
And I was distinguished professor in African American Studies here from 1993 up until the end of 2024. I'm a poet, literary, cultural scholar. I am the current poet laureate of the state of Michigan. And that's what got me running around the States. So I am, as Professor Levy called elders, I have the longest institutional connection to Wayne State University. Did not go to Wayne State University. My mother went to Wayne State University. She's a transfer from Tuskegee, and she finished her bachelor's here. She did her master's here, and she told me to go somewhere else. So I attended, did undergrad, BA, MA at Western Michigan University, and I did
Go Blackos. Undergrad.
Okay. And I did my Doctor of Arts at the University of Michigan in English. So.
I'm Jeremy Milloy, Associate Professor in the History Department. I'm also Director of our graduate programs. If there's anybody here who's interested in graduate studies in history, come talk to me. I am not from Detroit, as you can probably tell as soon as I say the words ago or sorry. From Canada, and I did do my dissertation research here at the Library and studied the history of Detroit. And I should get credit for being here because I'm emerging from a profound period of national Canadian mourning after we managed to lose both men's and women's hockey. So if I'm in a bad mood, you know why.
It is an honor and a privilege to be here to commemorate the centennial anniversary of Negro History Week, which we now know as Black History Month. As we celebrate and engage in discourse regarding Black history and Black studies, I would like to also acknowledge other relevant contributions of Dr. Woodson, including the creation of the Journal of Negro History. This is very important because in all professions where there's research done, journals are the ongoing record of that research. So that was the first one done that was dedicated to the study of Black folks, and it still exists. Also, the publication of the Miseducation of the Negro, the establishment of the Association for the Study of Negro History and Life, which is now a solid association for African American history and life.
Association for the Study of African American Life and History.
Thank you. That's also important because all academic disciplines have professional organizations where the scholars present their research. I can't remember the year that was created.
The organization?
Yes.
1950.
And it has a parallel component. It's not just for academics and academia. It has a parallel component for lay people. And this is very important because as scholars did research, the lay persons were reaching out to teachers and educators to ensure that Black history was being introduced in churches, schools, community centers, and the like. Another publication that served a similar purpose, like the journal is designed for professional scholars, was the Negro Bulletin. So a lot of times when we talk about Carter G. Woodson, we just go to Black History Month and miseducation of the Negro, but he did way more than that. The man was a committed scholar. I assert that both Black Studies and African American history, and all the related scholars and similar disciplines are part of a continuum some of us refer to as the African intellectual tradition, which began not 100 years ago, not 200 years ago, but in ancient African civilization, in what we call Kemet, or you may know it as Egypt. Those of us engaged here today, or those like us, wherever we may be, like our ancestors, we must step to the challenges that face these disciplines, our people, our history, and our culture. This is particularly important because at least 4 African American studies, Black studies units in academia in the past 10 days, efforts have been made to dismantle those. And that's my opening comment.
I have to follow that. So my journey is a little different because I'm the benefit of what people like Dr. Boyd and Kefentse have done in order to ensure that I can learn about my own culture. I make the joke to friends that I didn't have to go to an HBCU because my life was an HBCU because I grew up here in Detroit. So whether you went to a private school or a public school, Black history, culture was a part of the curriculum, and if it wasn't, people had questions and you were pulled out of school and put somewhere else. So I benefit from the labor of my predecessors. So it was just part of my formation and cultivation. So even though I have degrees in English and education, those things, it was so part of my formation that I didn't have to separate or silo education. But at the same time, I still had to fight for the legitimacy of what I was studying in traditional disciplines, and that's still very palpable. And we see politically how that's literally happening at a nanosecond. I mean, you can't even escape and watch something for pleasure without anti-Black racism seeping through. You know, I thought naively that I could watch an overseas award show and not expect to hear the N-word being blurted out, and then not being edited out, for example. And so, as my colleague pointed out, now more than ever, my generation has to be even more vigilant about ensuring that those who come behind me get what my predecessors have worked on to make sure it's part of the institution. And to piggyback off of what Dr. Chike said, it's my generation's responsibility to also make sure the community is involved in what institutions do too. So I'm going to leave that and defer to my elders.
I was born and raised right here in the city of Detroit. And I went to Detroit Public Schools, but because I lived so close to Highland Park, I also went to Highland Park Public School. My grandmother lived in Highland Park, so we would use her address when I went to Highland Park schools. And there were some great teachers in both school districts. But overwhelmingly, Black history was not present. There was always some committed teacher. You know, you always had that one committed teacher in the building who made sure that Black history got taught. But it wasn't like across the board. It was, everybody knew that teacher who was like that, who was strong about Black history. It was like learning it for them teaching it and us learning it. They were at war with a system, an educational system that was doing all it can to diminish, demean, remove, and avoid dealing with that history. So they were soldiers, and that it has a lot to do with why there was only 1 or 2 of those kinds of teachers at every school. Some teachers just couldn't, they weren't ready to wage that war. And so I by the time I became in high school, I was deeply engaged in learning Black history. I would go to the library, and a lot of those books were in the library. The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, the Autobiography of Malcolm X, Asada, the books by Angela Davis, they were all in the library, so I began to check those books out, because most of the teachers were never going to ever engage us in this kind of information. So I began to check those kinds of books out. Some of them I returned. But it was war. That's right. So it was war learning this stuff. And so then I went away to college. I went away to Western Michigan University, and it was clearly war. Of course, there were some committed professors who were on the side of us students, and on the side of Black freedom, on the side of Black people learning our history. But overwhelmingly, the college was a hostile environment for people caring about Black history, Black culture, and the freedom struggle. So that was war. When I graduated, my first teaching position was at the Wayne County Juvenile Detention Facility. So that's when I left Western, I came back to Detroit, and my first job, I was a teacher, was at the Wayne County Juvenile Detention Facility, and it was definitely war there. But because the students, the most important thing to them was being as close to living a normal life as a teenager could in a lockdown facility. School was the most normal thing in that place. Everything else was not normal. Asking permission to step out of your room to use the bathroom, asking permission to be able to take a book into your room, all of that, that's not normal. Having to walk in single file line, wearing a uniform, not even a uniform, a jumpsuit with Wayne County Juvenile Detention Facility on the back of it. That's not normal. But going to school from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock, that's normal. So they love school. So even though the adult environment was a war experience, working with the students was not. So that was a powerful experience for me to be able to begin to teach the things that I had learned, and the students be so well receptive of what they were learning. And but once you step out of these environments of students and institutions that embrace Black freedom, embrace Black history, embrace Black studies, we were at war all those times. Now, of course, we all know now that teaching Black history and Black studies you were at war. Everybody is pretty much aware of that now. But even during that time period, when this present administration wasn't in power, we were at war teaching this. And so I want us to all understand that Black studies was created in a hostile environment. Black history, with Dr. Patrrich was making it a significant discipline, not that it didn't already exist, but turning it into an important discipline. He was at war at his time, and right now we are engaged in that protracted struggle right now. So understand that Black studies is not like a lot of other studies. A lot of other disciplines, you learn it, and if you told somebody, hey, what's your major? And and you told them that major, people are, oh, that's okay, that's good. But with Black studies, you don't know what answer you might get or what response you might get, because it was created out of struggle, it's enmeshed in struggle, and we see it more than ever as we're living in this present day time. Thank you.
Okay, so I was at Western Michigan, went there as a freshman in 1967, and then King was assassinated.
Y'all took over the administration.
Yes, we took over that administration building,
the student center
building. There was a plan, student organization BAM. The plan was to have a demonstration later, but when they killed Dr. King, they said we're gonna move right now. So I was literally on Hell Week pledging Alpha Kappa Alpha. The Big Sisters took us off Hell Week so we could go because when you're on hell week, you're not supposed to talk to anybody. So they took us off hell week and sent us to what I call the real hell. And so we went over there, and the university administration called the National Guard on us. This was like Kent State. It was like Kent State shit, okay? It was serious. And the only reason it didn't turn into a disaster, number one, I do have to add that the SDS, Students for Democratic Society, stood in front of the Student Center building between us, a buffer between us and the National Guard. And that took a lot of courage. And also the progressive professors, they were also out there. So it wasn't going to be a simple thing that you're just going to go into the Student Center building and snatch these crazy Negroes out. So what had happened was, Kellogg's of Battle Creek was on the Board of Governors, all right, or Board of Regents. He called the president and said, don't go in there, stop them, and ask them what do they want. And we were like, oh yeah, wow, you know. So we could head the plane. So we had to sit down and talk about what we wanted. And in addition to asking for some Black Studies courses in the curriculum, we also asked for financial support for students who are financially challenged, students of color. We didn't just ask for us, for Black students. We also asked for, in particular, the Chicano student. There were a lot of Chicanos in Western Michigan, very poor, immigrant populations that came there to work the farms. And then there was a Martin Luther King Study Center set up, which I tutored in, and I worked a lot with the students who had not had the same kind of preparation you got in Highland Park. Exactly. And to tutor the students so they could succeed in this environment. So that sort of was the beginning. I think we were the first school to demonstrate for that in the research universities in the state of Michigan. But that also began, and what happens with that, of course, was having a Black literature course, right? So, in any case, you began to see the rise of Black studies, not just in the state of Michigan, you began to see it across the country. And you also began to see additional kinds of journals happening. The Black Scholar, Robert Christman and Robert Allen, San Francisco State University. You began to see the expansion of the Black World. That was Milloy Digest. Corey Fuller, by the way, went to Wayne State University. I don't know a lot of people know that. And he left here, went to Chicago, and took over Milloy Digest, changed the title to the Black World. And those were the journals that also helped to bolster the people who were going into academia to teach Black studies. They created the journals, more journals for the discipline, which was very important because you had to publish or you perish. So this is sort of the beginning. Now I want to switch here to talk about what's going on at Wayne State. And it's like where simultaneously you had, students here like Beeline Peak and Gene Cunningham and a number of other folks who went forward pushing for Black studies at Wayne State. And so they established a Center for Black Studies, which used to be over in the Student Center building. Okay, nice big area. They had a library, had a number of faculty, but it was a center, so the faculty were assigned to departments, not to the center. All right, and after a while, you begin to see the erosion of the center. You begin to see the lack of funding. Begin to see the release of folks, and the people who were tenured, they began to have to just deal with their departments. And it just sort of, the center itself basically disappeared, right? And there were a few classes that still had penetrated the curriculum and was there. But there was no center. There was no central focus, right? Now, then you have the student strike. And they demand for a department, which should have provided more stability. Should have. And I don't have time to go through all of the history, but what I find ironic is that there were certain things that were specified and were done. 5 guaranteed lines. for faculty. And then, while I was chair, every time I'd ask to hire somebody else, they'd be like, no. So we got stuck with 5 lines, 5 people. The only way we grew was when they had a spousal hire and the person requested to be in our department. So, but it was basically, we were treading water for at least 10 years. And then we were able to jump ahead a little bit when we were allowed to do a search. I think we hired 2 people, David and Xavier, right? And that was with the dean of over the college at that time. And ironically, he was very supportive, and he was a physicist. And he's very supportive. He was also very much active with the math corps project in the city. So he was really took the idea of community involvement that Wayne State is supposed to be dedicated to. He took it seriously. So we got support. But then, at the same time, we began to run into pushback. We got a provost who was overtly racist. And after in his first year, there were 4 black faculty, not in our department, but in other departments, who came up for tenure. They had been approved for tenure by the college. The dean got to the provost, and he denied tenure to all of them. With no sort of justification. It was ridiculous. Now, I'm a sue person. I was sued. They left. Because that's part of the fight. You have to fight it. You just don't, tuck tail and leave. So, unfortunately, they left. They tried to fire, he tried to not renew David's contract, and then I went to speak to Xavier, and Xavier was like, I'm out. He found him another job. I said, well, I can't protect you. So I couldn't tell him to stay here because his career was in danger, and they were trying to fire David. Now, mind you, anybody who was doing what we were doing, the provost, and his name, I'm going to call him out, Ron Brown, and I called him Ron Brown, don't like no brown people. They came after Chicano People Studies. They tried to, seriously, at the same time, the dean, he had hired a terrible racist dean, and that dean had decided the way he could balance his budget was by getting rid of Latino Latin American studies. Yeah, and so we had to go to the Board of Governors and complain to them, and then they told the dude, no, you can't do that. But it's a struggle. It's just an ongoing struggle. And at this particular point, after we get the what we thought was a blessing with the Mellon Foundation grant, which was specifically written in order to expand Black studies at the university, okay, and to bolster the department. That's the way it was written, right? So we were like, oh wow, this is cool. But you got to be careful, because now we got something they really want. They don't want us, but now they want the money. Yeah. So then you begin to see a lot of shuffling. You see a lot of shall we say, backdoor meetings and so forth. So we did manage to hire 3 new faculty, and then all of a sudden the provost who got the grant, he's fired. They give the grant to somebody who is not anywhere, not only not in Black studies, she's not even in the humanities, right? And her claim to fame was she had black skin. I'm like, yeah, okay. But totally inappropriate, and not taking or appreciating the expertise of the discipline, or who we were and what we know and how things should go. So it's basically been, like that. It's back and forth. It's just like, like a yo-yo, and when it just, the moment you think things are going to get better, they get worse. So after that happens, and it gets worse, and I'm going to stop. Then Then we're told that we're going to be moved out of our offices in the McAbee's building, right, or on Woodward, right, into another space. And they put us in this, whose office is too small. I couldn't even get all my books in here, okay? People don't have enough room to have a decent desk. And to make it even worse, we don't have a key to the front door. We have a key to the back door, like Jim Crow, okay? And that's what they think of Black Studies right now at Wayne State. And I'm telling you, you got a Black provost and you got a Black dean who's in charge of this. So it ain't simply about race. It's about opportunism and basically disrespect. And that's what was that's what's been happening here. And it's just really unbelievable that this institution has no consistency except inconsistency.
See, this is why I didn't want to follow you, Dr. I come to this discipline from a different perspective. I situate to myself as a learner. And if it's okay, I want to share a little bit about how Black Studies and Black history has been fundamental to my intellectual development as a historian of work in capitalism. So thank you for the inclusion on this panel. And when I came down here for the first time in 2012, I came as a student, and I immediately recognized this as what Kyle Mays calls a city of dispossessions, a city of the dual dispossession of its Black residents and inhabitants, and also the indigenous peoples who signed the Treaty of Detroit in 1807 to allow us to be here right now. And that's very similar to the place from which I am. And that dispossession and denial is really fundamental to the history of labor in this country. As Professor Burton-Stelly's work, which I'm reading right now, is defined as a structural location of Blackness and indigenous peoples and identity as always being hyper-dispossessed and hyper-exploited and set against free white labor, which is not subject to those same kinds of dispossessions at that same rate. And it's between those two poles that capitalism continues to flourish. In this moment, we are here upholding, I think, a commitment to Black studies and Black history, while faced with opponents that deny its relevance and attack its very existence. And of course, this itself is not new. The history of America, to me, is a history of the indispensable role of Black power, enslavement fields and factories, building American industrial dominance, improving American public institutions, but the concurrent constant erasure and denial of that power and its necessity. And this is the denial of the thief, who when caught first denies that he has stolen anything, and then denies the value of what he has taken. And so Black workers, this double dispossession is fundamental to labor history and labor struggle, full stop. The struggle to make visible not only one's work, one's essential work, as we learned during COVID, but the worthiness and even existence of the people doing that work, as the I Am a Man sign in the Reuther Library reminds us of the Memphis sanitation workers' struggle. And in response to workers' continued insistence of our existence, capital always seeks to intensify work while also hiding it, denying its value. And here, too, I've learned so much from Black history, Black studies, and Black experience as an indispensable light, clarifying those mystifications. And it's here I want to bring us to how Black studies and Black history is informing me in terms of the what we are told is an existential challenge to the university and to laboring peoples worldwide. That is what is being called artificial intelligence. This is once again a primitive accumulation that is based on stolen labor, that reproduces colonial patterns of land and water dispossession. And as historian Jason Resnikoff has mattered, the experience of Black workers with automation is instructive. He talks about a McKinsey study from 2018 warning us of the impending obsolescence of Black workers in the U.S. economy, that the jobs where Black workers are most located are most vulnerable. And yet, despite these dire warnings, he points out that Black obsolescence never happens. It's always just around the corner, a convenient stalking horse to deny that labor and to deny actually paying and treating it fairly. Historically, Reznikov, what he calls this myth of black obsolescence, what Will Jones calls the myth of black Ulysses, the true outcome of automation discourse, the true outcome of this introduction of technology is found in the experience of black workers. It's not replacement. We are never replaced. We are only displaced, disrupted, and sped up. He quotes one auto worker from the 1950s saying, all automation has meant to us is unemployment and overwork at the same time. I think that really captures what has been done to Detroit's working class over the past 40 years. And it was certainly an experience that was underlined when I learned about the experience of workers at Chrysler plants at Dodge, Maine, and elsewhere in the 1960s and 70s. Not automation, but hyper-exploitation of black workers producing misery, militancy, and violence. This current fiction of artificial intelligence is also based on dispossessed and denied African labor. The people who develop and train these models are located in Africa. Michael Jeffrey Asia of the Data Labelers Association says that artificial intelligence is actually African intelligence. And he says, we are training our own death. Invisible, exploited, being dispossessed and denied both in its inputs, but the key innovation of artificial intelligence, it also plays a crucial role in dispossessing the outputs of our knowledge. And here I'm using Adolph Reed's quotation of Walter Benjamin, mass reproduction is aided by the reproduction of masses. It's important to consider this attack on black history and black studies as part of a larger attack, not just on labor power, but the entire intellectual project of us thinking for ourselves, of us producing knowledge that we need. Black studies at Wayne State and elsewhere was born in struggle from people who said, we need knowledge that matters to our development and our community, not simply to make us more profitably exploitable by corporations. Now, we and our students are encouraged and sometimes coerced at every turn to outsource our attention and our thinking to platforms that produce not knowledge for us, but homogeneous text product that denies and erases black perspectives and creates a homogeneous commodity owned at birth by corporations. These are indeed challenging times. When I saw Professor Burton-Spelly speak last year, when everybody was freaking out and upset, I was encouraged and energized by what she said, which is trust your own analysis, trust your own critique, and be strong in that. And I'm grateful that I've learned from the formidable perspectives of black history, black studies, and black workers to draw from. Thank you.
We can move to the next question. That's how did black studies really become a discipline in the university? Of course, we got a little bit of that, well, not a little, got a nice amount of that from Dr. Boyd. How did it become a discipline? She talked about how it became a discipline at Western. Western Michigan University was out of protest, and really, you can probably follow almost every university. And that's how black studies was instituted. And then if anybody would like to give, you gave that a little bit of that too. How did it become a discipline here at Wayne State University? How did black studies kind of become a discipline? And you gave some of that, but I want to give opportunity if anybody wants to add more to that.
Well, I think it's important to make the distinction or establish what a discipline is, because, all people in black studies don't necessarily advocate that as a discipline. A discipline is called such because it's a structured approach to knowledge production that requires or dictates certain methods which make it distinguishable as a discipline, distinct from anthropology, sociology, or psychology. And a major debate in black studies is whether or not it's a discipline. Some people say it's a field. So the methods, research methods, theories, paradigms usually dictate what makes a discipline a discipline. So I would posit that any of these departments, including the first one at San Francisco State, was not founded as a discipline. In fact, when the first professors and other instructors that were teaching in these departments they had a third of scholarly information to use in their classes. So they were challenged with producing these. Dr. Boyd mentioned the creation of these journals early on, which were essential for the scholars in these departments or in centers or whatever, because publishing is a currency that people use to get promotion. So I just wanted to kind of add some clarity to the idea of whether or not it's a discipline or the fact that that's an ongoing debate. The first department was established in '68 in San Francisco State. Prior to that, at Merritt College in Oakland, California, they were having Black Studies classes, and there's a whole bunch of other things that goes with that. So I would say that the debate continues on whether or not it's a discipline. It really depends on your particular theoretical approach to Black studies. The second part of the question, how did it get established? Dr. Boyd touched on that. First, I think it was in '70 when the center was established, '72, then in '89. I think it may have been almost 100 students took over what was Helen Newberry Joy, which was the busiest, from my mind at the time, the busiest administration building. Financial aid, students want to get the financial aid. There's a lot of students in here, y'all know that, right? And of course, all the professors were formerly students. And some very bold and brave students decided they were going to sit in, and they stayed planted there where let me correct myself, they called it a study. They stayed there for 10 days and negotiated that we needed to move beyond the center. I'm not sure if the center still existed at the time, but they advocated and negotiated and won through negotiations the establishment of the Africana Studies Department. So it started as Africana Studies. The sit-in was in '89. The first classes were offered in January of 1990. And I would just like to add that being a community activist and a teacher in one of Detroit's African-centered schools, we were outside of Helen Newberry Joy with students, middle school students, drumming, dancing, protesting, and demonstrating. And it was the spirit of those students that sat in, whatever you want to call it, that touched me. So the following year, I became an African American Studies major. And by the way, I have 3 credentials, all of my degrees, bachelor's, master's, and PhD are in African American Studies. And I was driven by the activist component of it. And I think that is what's essential to sustain the attacks on Black studies. I can say more, but I won't. Not yet.
Well, I want to make a comment. You said, is it a discipline or a field? The fact that we produce PhDs has established the fact that it's a discipline. It's undeniable at this point. It's not even debatable. So people may want to talk about it, but that was the whole point, to get a department so you could train the scholars in the discipline. We had to do what we could do working in traditional departments and struggling in order to be able to do that. The only reason my master's thesis, which was on Chester Himes, got through Western Michigan's chair of the department because he hated what I was doing with Black literature. And God thank Coy Fuller, he published it in the Black World. So he could not deny my thesis because I was the only graduate student who had published. He didn't like it, but too bad. And you have to also recognize what was going on there. This is not in the absence of all kinds of cultural activism that's going on. I worked with Dudley Randall from 1972 until I went to grad school at Michigan in '77. Broadside Press also provided opportunity and visibility to Black writers, even those writers who should have been getting notice and credit and weren't getting it. Whether it was Robert Hayden, it was Margaret Walker, we brought her back into print. This was the kind of work we were doing. That's Black studies work. This was a cultural institution. We didn't make no money. okay? We weren't making no money, some of the poets did. But it was hard work. And what you saw at the same time with the rise of Black studies was the rise of Black cultural institutions. And that was significant to the success and the future of Black studies. Also, understand, after World War II, the occupation of Black soldiers in Europe also drew attention to the Black experience. You had musicians going there, you had artists, writers. They were doing Black studies and American studies, and that's what they saw as being American studies. They didn't want to just get this separated, segregated kind of curriculum they were doing in the United States. So you had the writers, Richard Wright, Baldwin, Josephine Baker, and I don't know how many more. They were going to Europe where they were respected as artists, as cultural producers. And this is happening at the same time in the U.S. where there is a denial. So ironically and interestingly enough, it was in fact, we were able to use the support of scholars like at the Sorbonne. Michel Fabre, for example, who was the person who first wrote about Richard Wright and brought notice to him, not just in France, but in this country too. And so the complicated rise of the international presence of Black studies also has to be understood. And the role that we were playing in terms of building a new democracy in Europe. I was a Fulbright scholar in Bremen, Germany in 1983-84. That was a really mind-blowing. They brought me there to teach Black literature at the university. Well, I was having trouble getting a job, here. Because they were reading our literature. They respected our culture. And they wanted some person of the culture to come and teach it. It was actually mind-blowing after going through all of these struggles in the States, where I was at the University of Iowa at the time. That was a real serious trip. If it wasn't for Darwin Turner, it would have been worthless. It was a global movement. And the discipline was, and what we say, the studies, was least respected here than elsewhere. I was in China. I was in Shanghai, Fudan University in 2009 to teach Black literature, okay? And I started talking to the students thinking they don't know any of it. I started talking about Belly Mountain, and they said, oh yeah, we read that poem. It was like in grade school when they were taking English. Their curriculum was more integrated than our textbooks for our children. So the perception of what it is and what we do is very important. If not necessarily here, then certainly globally. Believe me. And that's the thing that the discipline also does not get credit for. But we are always being asked to come somewhere all over this planet to talk, to represent. Ivo Hutchell, who was a professor here, he retired, he went back to Ghana and started the Du Bois Institute. Okay? So it's not all about what the powers that be think. In fact, I don't think they do a lot of thinking. That's the problem. They need to spend more time in the classroom, then they can have to rethink some of this stuff. But what we do is to enrich an understanding of not by understanding what it is to be and the things that we think about in this culture, in our culture. It is also important for other Americans of whatever background to know, because our culture has largely been in the vanguard of the struggle for democracy. And they know that that's true. Our people came up out of slavery. That was the major contradiction in the United States. You're talking about your democracy and you're practicing slavery. That's a fundamental contradiction. And so it is our struggle and the way we have pointed out those contradictions that has transform this country to what extent we can do it. I want to add right now that they have abolished, got rid of the Black Studies Department at University of Texas, Austin, also their Latino Latin American Studies, and their Women and Gender Studies. And it happened by the federal government bribing them with money. Okay, and that was the largest Black Studies department in the country. And it's gone. And that's what we're looking at right now. We're in the age of fascism.
And that brings me pretty to our next question. And you just get right on it. Because right now there's an attack on Black history, Black studies, and telling the story of the Black freedom struggle. And in what ways is this reminiscent of the past? And in what ways is the present attack unique? Anybody wants?
What is the attack on
Black studies, Black history,
Black people?
the Black people.
Yeah, people of color with the whole sort of anti-DEI legislation that is going on now. That if you practice that, you are practicing, what do you call it, reverse discrimination. It's absolutely ridiculous. And that's what they're doing. And that's the basis upon which they're attacking these different universities and saying, you need to get rid of these people, you get rid of this, curriculum. You need to stop, doing anything, these books, everything. I had a grad student that was one of my grad students at the University of Iowa. He's at the University of Florida. They took his Black film curriculum and posted it and said, this is exactly what we don't want. And that's just how blatant and you say, rude. And that's what we're looking at right now. And you got a president who's supporting that behavior. You got people breaking laws, civil rights laws that are supposed to be in place, and they're reversing all of that.
Right.
Mayor, what's the question again? How is it similar? And how
Basically, in what ways is it reminiscent of the past? And what ways is what's happening right now unique?
Well, I don't think there's ever been a time that Black people, Black history, Black culture has not been under attack.
Come on.
So we have always been in some form of responding to oppression. In terms of intellectual pursuit, production of knowledge and all of this, from the time of the enslavement of African people up through the era of enlightenment and all of this, along with the enslavement of Africa and other people, and the colonization of other people was something that one of my professors called epistemic violence. And that was a colonization of knowledge and information about Africa and other people. And that brings me to two major points that guided those sit-ins and other civil disobedience that occurred to establish the first Black Studies Department. And the two major goals was to correct the misinformation and or the information that was omitted in academia about African people, African history and culture, and other people that were not Western. I don't like to refer to people as if they're not. The second major point was to create access for marginalized people to academia. But as long as it has existed, this whole notion of academia, intellectualism, and all of this, it has colonized the information about African people. So we have not ever not been under attack, and I think any of us that are lazy enough, or maybe I shouldn't say lazy, I don't want to sound like I'm attacking anybody, but those of us that may not be acting in the activist spirit, then we need to rethink what we're doing. And some of us have that luxury to just do what we do and maybe think if we get a Black president, we made a success. If we get the Voters' Rights Act, we made a success. If we get affirmative action, we made a success. The people that award these things can do what? Take them back. Of course. So if we don't operate like we're engaged in an ongoing struggle. Somebody used the term war. It has never not been a war on African people or in other people, other marginalized people. And I want to say this, I wanted to say this to you, Dr. Boyd, the last gathering we were on a panel together. I commend you. The other event that we were at, the main point is I wanted to say to you publicly, I thank you and commend you because to me, you, and I've been in 3 Black Studies departments, every step of the way, and I've seen the various theoretical perspectives, views, but you seem to have been a chair that was committed to hiring people with PhDs in Black Studies, and that is very important. And the point you made about the production of PhDs is super important because you pointed out the need for the journals and things at the inception of the discipline, and PhDs in any field produce a body of knowledge associated with that field. So that does speak to the legitimacy. So I wanted to thank you. You hired me as an adjunct, and I know you were responsible for some of the other people being here. So I commend you in that regard. I wanted to say that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Black history, Black studies, the field, the discipline, the programs, they have created all kinds of work, all kinds of information, data that has furthered the knowledge about Black people, Black history, Black culture. And generally, when you go, if you're in some college, if you're in some institution and they have a Black Studies program or a Black Studies department, generally there's a thrust in that department. Not all departments are, some departments is everywhere, but many departments have a thrust. And I've witnessed mainly 3 thrusts, but I know there's more. One of them is the Black Excellence Thrust, and that is the department, the people who are in that program, they're really talking about the first Black person that did this, the Black person who invented this. I mean, it's important information, but that's the thrust of the Black Studies program, is producing information that you could run down the list of Black inventions, the first Black person to do a thing, the wealthiest Black person, the first Black person to win this award, Grammy, whatever, Oscar. I've seen that be a thrust in some programs. And the other stream is sort of what Bob Kefentse said, is really a strong connection to Black freedom struggle. And it pretty much teaches Black studies like it's an extension of the Black freedom struggle. Like it's a part of that struggle. Like the Black Studies department is not separate from. So at the same time that you're studying the Black freedom struggle within that program, within that department, you also are being a part of the Black freedom struggle in that program. So I've seen that as being one of the streams. And then the last is a presentation. I've seen that as a thrust as well. It's the presentation of Black history and Black studies as like a temporary way station. Because what the goal in those departments is that we have a more inclusive world history, a more inclusive American history, and that really they're not fully committed to this idea that this ought to be a Black history, that this Black history really should be a part of American history. And once we get to that, we can get rid of this department. We can get rid of the studies. So these are the 3 thrusts that I see the most. I know there's others, but I see those in departments the most. I'm not going to say which one that the department I teach in is, but I teach at the University of Michigan. I'm in the Department of African American Studies at U of M. At Ann Arbor. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, are any of these thrusts invalid? And if so or if not, which one do you see yourself as being more committed to?
In terms of the department, I'm going to speak in terms of I can only University of Iowa, Ohio State University, University of Michigan, Ohio State. It depends on what the time period is. To a large extent, you will have a range of political perspectives. The larger the department, the bigger the range.
That's right.
But ostensibly, folks, you do what you do the best with what you know. I teach culture, specifically literature, okay, and film. That's what I do. The point is, I don't know how you don't teach struggle when you're teaching anything. Because when I'm teaching film, I'm talking about discrimination in cinema. We're talking about the kinds of topics that black filmmakers select. We're talking about the struggles that black producers and directors go through in order to be able to present their perspective. So I don't know how you do it in any capacity. If you're talking about history, you're talking about the struggle of black people, and tyranny and all of that. You're dealing with it relative to struggle. And I don't know, but when you're building a department, you're largely going to be selecting people and interviewing people who are of a similar, perspective. I don't think there's anybody in our department who does not have an element, an aspect, and perspective on the fact that what we're doing is, number one, enlightening people, and that's basically what all professors should be doing. You're trying to make people know how to understand, think critically, and be able to identify the truth from lies. And Black Studies is a big part of what that is. You're supplying them with information about things that contradict the alleged identity of this country. So I don't know of anybody everywhere I work. I've seen some sort of interesting. I wrote an essay once about these different elements, and I saw them as, I think Manning Miracle had a journal called Souls. And he called me and said, I know I need you to make a contribution to this. And I'm like, okay, I'll try to figure out, make some time. And the essay, and I wish I was trying to pull it, but they moved my stuff. It's all in the boxes. I'm sorry. I can't vote for myself either. All right. But the essay was called A Layover in Detroit. The Future of Black Studies, Afro-elitists, Afrocentrists, and Afro-ecentrics. And I've seen it all. Okay, your Afro-elitists, that's hard. And the way that they relate is a very strong, unfortunate class view. Not saying the early Black scholars who were there, that is not true. But basically what they're doing is exploiting the discipline in order to get a primetime show on 56. Okay? So you have people who are in the business in order to become famous and make money. All right? And then you have people who are like so self-absorbed in what blackness is, they no longer know how to connect to other people in society. And I recognize that black people themselves are also divided into different classes. And paying attention to that, bringing attention to that emulating the worst of America is not a good idea. And we have people who have taken advantage of the struggle, not just the struggle for Black studies. I'm talking about the struggle to get into these universities, right? And they get into them, and then they get these jobs, and they end up like Clarence Thomas, okay? We're talking about that. So, it's not just significant for you to be a particular ethnicity. If your values are corrupted, then that's a problem. And then inside of all of that, and I call the Afro-eccentrics, I was having to deal with some guys in the department, the largest Black studies department at the time in Ohio State. They were the biggest sexist ever. I mean, it was just like I was just like blown away. The kind of insulting things that they would say to the women in the department. I'm from Detroit. I don't play that. I don't play that. Okay? And I would check them on that. No. You're wrong, and I don't do what you tell me to do. I do what I know I'm supposed to do. So you got to realize that black people are people as well. And they have to be held accountable for what they do and say, and also misrepresent the discipline of some of the people I have mentioned. But it was very, very difficult to come to realization. I had just left Iowa, and we were tight at Iowa. We were just a program, and we were tight. We supported one another. And every single year, people were being denied tenure. And that's why I left, because I knew I'd never get tenure at the University of Iowa in the English department, because we were not a department, we were a program. And that's what the department is supposed to bring: stability, independence, self-determination. And that's so important in this business. That's what it is in business.
You mentioned these three approaches.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the point with that, I've seen a lot of thrusts, but I just picked three of them. One of them is the Black Excellence Thrust, one is the Black Freedom Struggle Thrust, and then the other is that really it shouldn't even be a Black Studies. We're only doing this because Black Studies is not included in world history and world studies, and the minute we can get to that, we'll get rid of this.
Okay, well, what you made me think about are the various different theoretical approaches to knowledge production, which is what's supposed to happen at the PhD level. So, just to maybe more formally say some of these things, you have like feminism, Marxism, womanism, Afrofuturism, Afrocentricity, and my first experience out of undergrad was at Temple University, where I was trained as an Afrocentrist.
Yes.
More specifically now it's called Africology. And that's a particular theoretical approach. I was very staunch in that. And then I went on to Michigan State, which I really couldn't even work as an Afrocentrist. But what I have come to find, you'll hear people say often that black people are not a monolith. So, and we're not a monolith. And I think as Black Studies has evolved from the first department that maybe had a very minimal theoretical guidance, it has expanded. Now you have Black Queer Studies, Afrofuturism, all these theoretical perspectives, so there's room for people to get in where they fit in. And I think we all have the opportunity to bring our own political, ideological perspective and intellectual approach to how we want to work to the discipline. So I would never say, even though I am biased as a black nationalist, but I would never say that there's one approach that is the approach, because it has expanded and it's room for people to do what they do. One distinction that I think, and I'm going back to the discipline question, and I think this is a debate this is at the core of the debate of whether or not Black Studies is a discipline. Afrocentrists believe that studying black people in and of itself does not constitute Black Studies.
Come on.
It's how you study them. And Afrocentrists or Afrocologists strongly advocate that you're grounded in the history and culture of the people that you study. That's all I was trying to say.
Anybody else want to respond to that? All right, so I want to say that we're in Detroit, and I know that we probably getting close to the end of the program, so I want to say this question and then allow everybody to give some final remarks. We're in Detroit, and Detroit has, of course, a rich history. Detroit, first, let me be clear, Detroit is a black city. So I want to be clear on that. Detroit is a black city. Detroit is not a city that has a black community. Detroit is a black city, and other people live here, but this is a black city. So the history of Detroit and how it became a black city and since it's become one, is an important part of learning, understanding Detroit. So understanding Detroit is not just understanding Ford Motor Company in the auto industry, or understanding the French who arrived in 1701 in the fur trade. That's not what learning Detroit is. It's not just that. You have to have some grounding in the history of black people in the city of Detroit to really understand Detroit. How has the history of Detroit affected black studies at Wayne State? And on the flip side, how has the black studies in Wayne State played a part in the community, in black people's lives, and what black people are doing and have done in the city of Detroit?
Anwar, you want to say something?
Okay, so the first thing is this: Detroit has to acknowledge that it participated in slavery.
That's right.
That's first, and then we can go on further. So when you mentioned 1701, it enslaved people here as the French were getting wealthy. That's right. So, and then the narrative of it being part of the Underground Railroad erases its participation in slavery, and it also erases Canada's participation in slavery too, right? So that, to quote Kefentse Chike, it's always, never have been, is like the existence of black life here in particular, and globally speaking. Just acknowledging that part, and then we can continue on, and then we can talk about reparations and all those other things too, right? And so the way in which black life is constantly having to be remembered here is part of how black life, black culture, black studies contributes to the city and vice versa. And even what we're experiencing now with phrases like urban renewal and revitalization, aka gentrification, or my family calls it the new pilgrims have arrived, is also part of that. So, and the amount of black folks who bypass Detroit and now think it's cute to come too. So the ways in which black folks participate in a sense of neo-settler colonialism too is something we also have to sit with, because even when we're invited to these spaces and places, we have to question the invitation and also the agenda of that as well. And so all I have to say, like, that's a constant thing we'll have to check ourselves on too, because it's easy to point on external oppression, but we also have to think the ways in which we participate in that too. And to piggyback off of what Dr. Boyd was saying earlier, the bourgeois black is as problematic as the oppressive white community too, because they learn the master's tools, and instead of dismantling the house to close out the Lord, they create more prison cells. So that's the other way in which, we're talking about freedom struggle and dismantling into black oppression. We gotta also talk about the ways in which that gets ingested within black bodies and black zeitgeists too. And that's what now we have to, my generation and those to come, is to always think about the ways of dismantling and internalizing anti-blackness too.
Yeah, amen. The thing, I was in a administrative meeting years ago, and it was a big pushback on diversity, all of that. And it was, I don't know, I can't even remember, a bunch of partner chairs and dean and whatever. And the thing that was very so apparent, and what I feel at Wayne State, is the fact that this is a black city. The institution itself has a fear of blackness. They are afraid to have more black faculty here, regardless of whatever it is that they're going to do. Seriously, I mean, because they're in a black city. That is a big part of their operation. They don't want that to be the identity of the institution. And I can't remember the exact year, David, you might be able to help me, when the provost have changed admissions to Wayne State University, where it used to be standardized tests were optional. If you graduated with a 3.0, the test was optional. And then,
2011.
2011. And
Don't forget, when they held that meeting, they held it in the police station.
Yes, thank you. And they changed the entrance requirement, and what it did was significantly reduce the number of incoming black students to the university. At the meantime, other universities, like the University of Michigan, get better standardized tests because they are culturally biased. So what they did, and what his intention, and again, that was Brown, his intention was to change the complexion of this campus.
And without informing the public, I'll just say this, within one semester, they cut the number of black students incoming by 37%.
That's right. Yeah, and I wrote a letter to the editor of the Detroit News about what this means. And basically, they cut out their nose and spike their face because then they didn't have any money. And he was kind of going to bring in all of these blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, dude, no, this is a city university. You're supposed to service the community that the university is in. You got all that rhetoric about community, serving the community, yada, yada, yada. But no, they wanted to run from the community because the community was black.
And to improve their graduation rates.
Could be improved. Well, see, and that's another thing. You want to improve the rate? If somebody say you go to school, it's a financial consideration. Because most of the students were working and going to school simultaneously. It's going to take you twice as long to graduate.
That's right.
If you got to work in order to pay your tuition or what you owe. I talked to students who dropped out of school because it ended up just working. And they're saying, I really should have stayed because I've lost opportunities because I don't have that piece of paper. You know, so it's a problem. It's a question of integrity and commitment to the people who are here. And I tell my students all the time, when you go to vote, you make sure that you pay attention to who you voted for to be on the board of governors for this university. Because they make the decision. And during that time, there was a majority of Republicans on the board of governors for Wayne State University. And the school functioned like it was a Republican institution. Right? So it's deep. It's deep. And I'm telling you, I'm retired. I ain't seen it. And it's just the same pattern over and over and over again. But you got to pay attention to the details. You know, who's doing what and why are they doing it? You gotta know, you gotta participate. You know, and so what happens? You got population goes down, less tuition, less money, no tuition goes up.
I know you want to respond.
Yeah, what was the question?
But I want to say this, I want to say this, and you can respond both ways. You can respond to the question itself, and then the last thing I want to say, and that is, I want everybody to close with what importance, what significance do you think Black Studies has or ought to have in this climate, this world that we're in today? I want everybody to respond to that. What responsibility, what significance does Black Studies have, or what does it ought to have, what should it have in the climate that we're in today? So you can respond to the past question, but I want everybody to close with that.
I was still trying to remember the question that preceded that, but
Okay.
anyhow, no, you don't have to repeat it. It was something to the effect of the impact of Black Studies on Detroit and vice versa.
Yes, that's right.
Once I became aware of what research was in terms of an academic thing, it immediately occurred to me that Detroit was probably the prime laboratory for studying Black people because of what Detroit has been and what it has meant to Black people. And I think that, and there's people in our faculty that have done research on Black people. I think David has done stuff on the labor movement. Aaron, I did something on African-centered education, and I like to also include that African-centered education does not get enough attention because it is the sister movement. It's very much a part of the Black Studies movement. It has similar goals
That's right.
and objectives. So I think that of all of the units, all the Black Studies departments in Southeastern Michigan, I don't think any of us, from the perspective of Black Studies scholars, have even scratched the surface of the wealth of information that's here to be known. My hope at the inception of the idea of the Detroit Center of Black Studies is that it would expand on that. For some of us, we think that's questionable now. But I think I'll go back to those early scholars, whether it was George Washington Williams, Carter G. Woodson, people sneaking to learn how to read, Frederick Douglass tricking little white kids to teach them the ABCs. If we don't have that kind of commitment to education, and for those of us that engage in research, I feel like that's the responsibility that we have to make this discipline, or whatever we want to call it, work for us in a way that it contributes to enhancing the life chances of our people, liberating us, and by default, that makes the world better.
All right, thank you.
I got to go after Kefentse and Melba. That's what I keep telling myself. So, where are we now and where we're heading, right? Well, the thing that I have to remember for myself is to give zero fucks about what I teach and how it will be received. Just do what I'm supposed to do. Number one. Number two, I don't want to hear the word ally, I want to hear the word accomplice. So, you know, John Brown was willing to die for my freedom. I need that type of coalition, or leave me alone. That's how I feel about it. Because I'm going to teach it regardless. That's what I was brought here to do. Even if I lose my job in Kerry Mill, I'll still do it the way in which Hubert Harrison did. You know, he worked as a laborer during the day and he studied at night. So it is in my blood, bones, and my spirit. I want to do it regardless of what my occupation affords me to do. And that's my commitment. And it would be disrespectful to my biological ancestors, my collective ancestors, to not do that. And that's the type of energy we need in this moment and in the future if things allegedly get better. And that's what Black Studies has taught me, and anyone who's gone through the curriculum learns, is that you have to be willing to fight for the things you deserve to have. And that's what Black Studies has taught me, and we'll long after I'm gone. So that's my opinion.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Dr. Boyd.
You know, I think, again, I don't want to go back over what I've already said, but, again, this is Detroit, but also the importance of what has happened in the city. Why do Black people come here? And looking at that history, what were the opportunities? And it's not just about races, again, as I want to get it, it's about class. And what happened in the labor movement and the struggles that took place in order for Black people to be even skilled workers in the factory, to be able to become educated. These things were accomplished here. Black people did amazing things here in the city of Detroit. And oftentimes, to Wayne State's credit, they went to Wayne State. Okay? But it's more important than that. You know, what we should be doing is exposing, and I think, Black people, to a large extent, we're close to the contradictions. We see them because they hit us first. You're looking at right now, this country's in trouble economically. It's a mess. And so the future, talking about AI and how that is starting to be an affair. I actually got a letter for a lawsuit. They stole some of my stuff, okay? I don't mind people writing poetry like me, that's cool. But I'm just saying that we are facing very, very difficult times. and they come after the most vulnerable first. And we're living right now in a fascist period in American history, straight up. And what they're doing and the things that they're pulling off with the quote-unquote immigrants, right? And that's a new slavery. He's taking them down and like selling them in South America. What the hell? You know, this, I mean, it's just very frightening. Going after Somalian people, saying crazy stuff like they're eating the dogs and the cats, and capturing them, pulling, you know, and also total disrespecting the idea of due process. You don't have to be a citizen to deserve due process in a legitimate democracy. We are in a very dangerous time, and a lot of people say, well, it's not affecting me. That's what they said in Europe.
That's right.
They didn't say nothing, and then what happens? Then they come for you next. Understand that we are vulnerable people, and we don't know what they're going to do next. And he's devaluing us by getting rid of our intellectual and cultural and historical presence. And that's what's going on. And it's very, very disturbing. You know, so, you know, I don't know, I'm a little more disturbed about some of these really big issues, but I also feel that the department is being mistreated because of this guise that's going on right now where there's no protection for us. So push them in the back door, move them out the way, and we're going to do what we're going to do. I'm sorry, but it would not have happened, I'd say, even a few years ago. We had certain people in place like Dr. Johnson and, you know, Murray Jackson. There was a time when things were developing here because there were people in position on the board of governors that was making sure that it happened. But we don't have that representation anymore. And you've got to have it at all levels.
We're under receivership right now.
Exactly. Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, so where I see it again is, I think in this day and age, producing information is overrated. We're told that we come to university to produce information. We have too much information. Everybody's confused, everybody's agitated and triggered all the time because they're getting bombed with more information than the human body and mind is actually supposed to process. But we don't have enough of his knowledge and will and wisdom and understanding. And Black Studies is an example of a discipline of knowledge that was created and developed so that people could transmit wisdom and knowledge and understanding to each other that was essential for living in a hostile world. And, you know, the attacks on that tradition and that knowledge only indicate how deeply precious that it is, right? It indicates how dangerous that kind of collective knowledge and shared meaning making can be because it's fundamental to our ability to advance together. So I think it's incumbent on everyone in the university to understand that we are in this together, and this is a place where we're supposed to be able to make meaning and share understanding together, whether it's African American studies, history, Proper Lumumba scholars, all aspects of this university. As Professor Boyd said, we are all in this together, and it's time to show up for each other. So, thanks.
All right. I want to give an opportunity, thank you to all of our panelists. I do want to give an opportunity for you to ask a few questions. I know we've passed time, but I want to get at least a few questions in from people in the audience, but I do want them to be questions. So I want to be clear. I want it to be questions, and let's make them as quick as you can make those questions. We want to have a Q&A session, not a U&A session. So if there's anybody who has a question. I see a hand up. Anybody? Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm curious as to what the professors in the discipline are doing to come together. You mentioned University of Texas at Austin. They ended the program here and other places. may be in jeopardy. How are professors in these various departments coming together to form some kind of unified response?
Well, as recent as today, I saw an email from Jafari Allen, who is the head of the African American Studies Center at Columbia. Well, as recent as a letter out to people in Black Studies departments around the country, organizing study center at Columbia. So this is probably the recent effort I've seen on a national scale where they're trying to get people in Black Studies departments throughout the country to sign on as sponsors. And then they're going to have people from the four, I think Dr. Boyd mentioned all the parties throughout the country. I don't remember by heart when I started, but then they will have people close for diminish 4 different Black Studies units when I did my comments. So that's an initial effort that is happening. For the idea is to make this a national effort to push back. In terms of what's happening here, I can't say that I know. Maybe some of my colleagues can. Make this a national effort to push back. In terms of what's happening here,
I was going to say on the same note about what's going on here, I'm going to talk a lot of it too, because a lot of things are done without our knowledge, a lot of backdoor conversations, things like that.
but I think I appreciate what you're saying, but whatever they are doing, whoever they are, it shouldn't matter. We should be coalescing amongst ourselves and organizing. If you're not going to participate in that effort that I mentioned, then we should be coalescing amongst ourselves here to push back in whatever ways that we can. Because, as Dr. Boyd said, I was brought from the point you made, you know, in reference to form where they said, well, they came to the ball game, and then so do we sit back and wait? Because historically what I found as a historian, and this is a Black man in America, the powers that be does what they do regardless. You can almost set your clock on how they're going to act. But at what point do people that are oppressed do something different? As a historian, thank you.
The department is meeting. Like I said, I'm retired. They just tell me everything on the phone. But, no, they are, they're addressing it and basically also having to, I know at one point I attempted to talk to the person who is now in charge of the Mellon Foundation grant and the provost at the time. And basically stating that the grant was initially written to come under the auspices of the department to increase the presence of Black studies at the university, right? And then what they did was made sure that the leadership had absolutely no interest in Black studies, and actually no expertise in Black studies. And it was very interesting because we even appealed to the Mellon Foundation and talked about the lack of addressing, the guidelines of the grant. And they didn't do anything about it. In the interim, you have people who are being dismissed and people who are being hired who are going to, exercise, whatever their grant scheme is. And all what we can do is we can do what we do, right? Send letters to the editor. I just heard from a colleague, Valerie, today that there's actually an article about the person who's in charge of the Mellon grant who has not been doing what she's supposed to do. So people are getting called out. So I'm like, okay, cool. So I was just talking to my husband. I said, well, he said, write a letter to the editor of the Atlantic and talk about what happened to the Mellon grant at Wayne State. They hate that. They don't want to be seen being read in the Atlantic or the Detroit News or Free Press about what they have done and haven't done. That's what we do. We're writers. You know, we're intellectuals. And that's an important way to fight the situation. You know, so that's my part of it. But also the faculty is meeting and dealing and addressing with this problematic.
We got one more question right here.
So I have a question about what advice would you give to, I guess, the youth, like Black youth, in order to, I guess, like fight against upcoming dangers before it gets too late? Because we don't have like a specific figure to follow, like Martin Luther King or Malcolm or Stokely. Like we don't have a figure to follow. So what would you like suggest for us to do, I guess?
The mic?
Yeah.
After this question, we'll take one more. So,
In terms of Black studies, I'm a staunch, that is my evangelical gospel mission, promoting Black studies. I go into high schools and talk to students, maybe that's not just exclusively what you're talking about, but I think by students taking our classes, if you're not, I'm always pushing for major. You don't want to major in Black studies, co-major. You don't want to do a double major, minor. If you don't want a minor, everybody in the university has general education requirements that they have to take. Take the classes we offer that meet general education requirements. I'll give you an example. As an undergraduate student, I had to take a humanities requirement. And that meant possibly sitting in a class looking at Romanesque architecture while I listened to Bach, Beethoven, and Baroque and all those people. Advisors said, look, you can meet the same requirement by taking a class called The History of Jazz. That was a no-brainer. I learned so much more about music. I was not bored. And they didn't have hip-hop classes then, but we have that now. So I encourage students to take our classes. When you mess with people's bottom line, people's money, which is the bottom line in a capitalist society, that always gets their attention. How effective it will be, I don't know, but it seems like a place to start. In general, I think there are leaders, but I think Black Lives Matter kind of did away with this idea of a messianic leader, one person that's going to lead us. The things that happened in the 60s made people less reluctant to step up in that way because we know they co-opt and kill leaders. But there are other ways and models to organize, because I know we're out of time. I would encourage you to take our classes like Black social movements, Black social and political thought, where you can be exposed to some of the examples of how we can work and push back. Thanks.
Quickly, one more thing. It's not illegal to gather and have reading groups and conversations within your community. And if you can't physically do it, we have virtual technology that can do that. And that's what activists in Gaza do. They meet digitally and give advice. Like during the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, we were getting information on how to treat our eyes with tear gas from people in Gaza. So we have these government tracking devices. Use them for good. You can organize and hold spaces. You can do virtual reading groups where you can discuss readings both historically and contemporarily too. Because we can only provide so much for you, but also the joy of being a student is you can give yourself permission to gather and learn. And you can come to our offices and say, hey, you mentioned this thing, you can come to our office hours too. You might not be able to fit it in your schedule to take said class at said time. We're also available for that too. I just want to add that one as well.
Professor, here we're going to end it. After you.
Yeah, I just want to add that, like, everybody I know
who's ever made like real serious change didn't think of themselves as like a leader necessarily or a change maker. The people I know have actually done things that were meaningful, have seen a problem that bothered them and started working on it, and then connected with other people. And when you are in a student space, that allows that there's practical meaning that you can then test the stuff you're reading and learning against, and then bring that back into your life. So I just encourage everyone who's interested just to try stuff and learn, and keep trying stuff to learn.
And know your rights. Know your rights, and read the Constitution. All of that.
You're a student, that's what you're here for, you're to learn. Get smarter. You have to be smarter than us, because it's going to get deeper. That's what you're supposed to do. You're a student, study. And also know what your rights are as a human being and as a citizen.
Give it up for our panelists. And thank you all for coming out. I want to thank you for your attention, your questions, your comments, and thank our scholars, thank our panelists, and thank everybody that helped to make this program possible and successful. Thank you, everyone.
You must acquire an understanding of yourselves. Could I hope to see you living among yourselves as the people I've spoken of? Living in charity, love, and in sympathy with each other? It can be done.